Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, in this video, I just want to continue with my just ongoing effort to try to better understand NPD. Okay, yes, I have a diagnosis of NPD. I had it 35 years ago, but I've lived with it for decades, and it's been a mystery the whole time. I mean, it continues to be a mystery, even though I try so hard to define it. And yeah, I understand the basic definition. I mean, I don't have a problem with that, but I'm just really deeply understand this condition. Obviously, just knowing the features of the disorder, that doesn't give you understanding. That's just a description. So I really struggle. And I feel like even with all the efforts so far, I feel like I still am struggling to really get a better and better, simpler understanding. So I'm going to try once again to just, each time try to improve a little bit or just a little different angle, just a little different angle. But this time today, I want to talk about my experience with basic escapism. Okay. And I want to try to define that. So it's not such an easy word. I really define escapism at the deepest, I want to say at the limbic level, at the very level of arousal, the same level of arousal where you start salivating for a nice hot pizza, or you get reactive to seeing an attractive person. Basic limbic reaction. Okay, that the notion of escapism. Okay, the theme of escapism can get embedded down at our basic reactive, I would say limbic level. Maybe limbic I'm using poetically, but very basic level. And really try to define escapism. And there, I want to start trying to distinguish narcissistic processes from pathological, diagnosable narcissistic processes. Okay, so my hunch is that if you're diagnosable as having, let's say, a mental condition, okay, you're going to have the same narcissistic processes that everybody has. Okay, because I think narcissism is in the world. It's just all people, or a lot of people, have narcissistic processes. But there's going to be something different about how it shows up if you're diagnosable. And so the real issue is not if you have a narcissistic process. It's just that your mental illness shows up in the narcissistic processes. Okay, so that's another important thing too. The very, very essence of narcissism is not having a narcissistic process. The very essence of narcissism is you have exaggerations in your neurology that show up with more exaggeration in your narcissistic process. Okay, so basically, if you really want to define narcissistic disorder, you're talking about exaggerations in narcissistic processes. Okay, that are the result of things out of whack in the brain that are causing exaggeration. So really, if you really want to get down to it, narcissism is probably just sort of issues in the arrangement of aspects of our neurology, probably having to do with the frontal lobes, probably having to do with the amygdala. I want to talk in other videos about noise signal, because I think different parts of the brain create different levels of noise that occupy attention in the brain. Okay, I really believe that in a funny way, what the amygdala does is it puts a lot of noise in the brain. Noise, I say metaphorically, right? But that what's really going on to make the difference between a regular person with narcissistic stuff, and an actual diagnosable, is that what's really going on with us is we have, I think, noise signal issues where the noise is over flooding, and maybe also just more easy disruption of like frontal lobe activities that I believe are related to the awareness and the holding of dissonances. Okay, so when you really get down to it, what you're really talking about when you actually get to what's the difference between NPD and regular narcissism, or just regular human experience, you're really just getting down into just the way the brain is arranged, really. And I think that's so important, because I think narcissism really is almost a universal experience. Okay, for some more than others. Okay. But to really make somebody diagnosable, it's not like you're uniquely in a narcissistic category, but it's more like you have issues in the brain, in the signaling, in the way different parts of the brain interact, where you get exaggerations in the narcissistic area that other people also experience. Okay, so just want to put it out there, because I think too often, I think even in psychoanalysis, I think we want to put the narcissistic people in a very special place. You know, these people, they have unique narcissistic issues, when in reality, a lot of people have narcissistic issues. And that what's really going on with us is really, I think, neurological, okay, and not so much psychoanalytic, okay. And yes, there is a psychoanalytic story behind how we get there, maybe to some extent, okay. I'll admit that, but I still think that I think it's a mistake to ignore that we may have some real noise signal issues, you know, some overflooding, some issues of, you know, sort of disabling a little bit, you know, degradation of dialectical functioning, which I think it has to do with the frontal lobe, but it could also be behavioral. But it's just to such a degree that it really is kind of a disabling of the full, you know, full integration of the neurological processes, you know. So sorry about, there's an airplane out there. Anyway, so today I want to talk about escapism, and I want to try to always describe these narcissistic processes sort of in terms of the non-pathological, sort of just the everyday, what happens with ordinary people, and how it also shows up in, let's say, somebody who's diagnosable, because I think it's so important to see those differences. And finally, I want to say that I'm going to give a little testimony here. You know, I've been dealing with this for decades, you know, decades. And a lot of people have NPD and have been dealing with it, you know, for decades, you know. But at this stage of my life, I can honestly say that, sorry, I can honestly say, I apologize for that. I can honestly say that I am a big believer in having insight. Okay, I think insight is extremely important. Okay, and you know, the idea of being self-aware. I mean, obviously, self-aware can take place at different levels. You know, you can have self-awareness, just accepting the diagnosis, just accepting the DSM. Other people can kind of get lost a little bit, I think, in the psychoanalytic stuff. You know, like, oh, my mom, my dad, how I felt. You know, how I think of myself, my traumas. I mean, I'm not saying those aren't real things, but I think by getting too bound up in that, I think we start to, how would I say, we start to actually lose attention to how serious our neurological situation is. And so we kind of spend so much time in the story that we don't invest enough effort in actually what we're going to have to do to sort of deal with our neurology. Because I think it requires a lot of behavioral adaptation. Okay. And the final thing I want to say is that I don't think just having insight actually operates that much of a change in us. Okay. So in other words, it is good to have the insight, but because our stuff is so much in the limbic, I think, and when I say limbic, I just mean because the basic patterns in narcissism are almost at the instinctual reactive level. Okay. In other words, basically our programming, okay, the patterns, our mental patterns, our reaction patterns are so down in just the most basic limbic reactive level, okay, that having awareness doesn't actually by itself alter the behavior, okay. So in other words, if I'm in a peaceful place and nobody's provoking me and I'm not in a high pressure environment, low stress, it's wonderful to have the insight, you know, because the insight is just great. But when I'm actually under pressure and things are actually causing limbic reactions in me, the insight is ineffective. Okay, so I just want to put that out there because I think a lot of people have this idea that if I just go through this process with, you know, understanding my childhood, understanding why, maybe getting some hypnosis, you know, the idea is that somehow all this understanding is just going to kind of like rearrange, you know, the programming. And I think the bottom line is I think we have some deep limbic level programming that I think is probably almost, I'm not going to say permanent, but I'm saying probably pretty close to permanent, you know. I don't discount. Some people have talked about how EMDR can kind of like remove a few elements, you know, from the deepest level. You know, I'll assume that's true. Okay. But, you know, for most ordinary experience, I think if you actually have a diagnosable personality disorder, I think we have a lot of reactive programming at the very deepest limbic level that, in my opinion, is pretty much permanent. And I say this as programming, okay? So that having the insight is helpful. It's very helpful, but if we don't do something with the insight, if the insight doesn't become a consistent routine, I think the limbic will always beat us because it's so instantaneous. Okay, and I can give you testimony. Okay, how many times have I just been chopping my vegetables, and I've got this pile of vegetables, and then a little piece falls on the floor, and I get so angry. It's not because I don't think because of some psychoanalytic issue of how I have all this rage from whatever. I think I'm sorry. I think that's bullshit. I'm sorry, but I think that's just bullshit. I think it's because the noise signaling in my brain is probably a little intense, just because I have that kind of brain. And I also think that I have certain limbic programming, which is just deeper than my conscious awareness. Okay. In other words, whatever wisdom I've accumulated at the conscious level, I think the limbic programming is just a little more, it kind of trumps everything when you're in the midst of a reaction. So I think we need to understand, our limbic reaction and our limbic programming, that sort of trumps just about everything, even including wisdom and awareness. Okay, so with that in mind, I just don't think it's good enough just to sit and say, hey, I've got awareness, or hey, I've got insight. It's just, the insight has to then become, and this is the hard part, it has to become a constant program, okay, a committed program. Okay, so now, if let's say we're still debating, maybe not everybody agrees, you could say, I don't agree that cluster B is an addiction. Okay, I never said it was an addiction. But what I am going to say is we could debate, we don't even have to debate that. I'm not even going to say it's an addiction. Okay, but like the addict, okay, we have to have, I believe, a constant program, because our limbic reactions are always going to revert us back to things that we really don't want. Okay. And so I'm not saying it's a fight against the limbic system, no fighting, but we have to have a program around it. Okay. And I would say more like to work with it, not to fight it and not to suppress it. I'm not talking about suppression. But we have to have, a constant program where we never believe that our insight by itself is helping us at all. Okay. The insight is part one, but it has to be applied into a constant program, okay, so that we can sort of be there with the limbic system when it reacts, because it's going to react, okay, and those programs are deep-seated, so basically that's where I see the similarity to addictions, and that's where I get a lot of inspiration from the addictions, okay, from the addiction recovery, because they assume that they need a constant program and they've got constant structure, constantly aware, that their drug addiction is bigger than they are. And I think we should feel the same way, that because our issue is so programmed down into our limbic behavioral reactive, software, let's say, that we're just not going to beat it with understanding and insight. I mean, the insight is a gateway, but that is the gateway to developing an actual behavioral plan. Okay, so I would say, if I'm looking at the menu of what exists in psychology today, I would say it would be a combination of something from CBT, from cognitive behavioral therapy, but taking inspiration from addictions recovery, something like that, And I hope that some intelligent person might come up with some kind of a fusion of CBT and addiction recovery model. Maybe without the religious element, because I think that actually kind of spoils, a little bit of the addictions recovery. And I think there are some narcissistic aspects of addictions recovery that I've seen, because I've participated in some addiction recovery, and I think some of that could be kind of cleaned out, because really it's just sort of a collaborative community behavioral program where you have that support from people who are going through the same thing, and also sponsorship from people who are maybe a little further along. I think all those things, the basic sponsorship, the peer support, the regularity, the idea of going to meetings like almost every day or several times a week, I think those things are very, very helpful. Sorry about those dogs. I feel so. Those are not my dogs. Anyway. So the idea is that, sponsorship, peer support, several times a week, and just the idea that you're constantly you know, you accept that you need to have sort of a constant program, not to make your life tedious, but just to make your life so much better, because you can see that if you adapt adapt this kind of like program to your life, that you're actually going to get much more out of your life. Okay, so it's not like, oh God, I have NPD. I have to live with all this extra procedures. What a pain in the ass. I'd rather be dead. No, actually, having those procedures can help make your life so much richer, and it really is worth it. Yeah, you'll have your problems, but in the end, it's a better life. So all I'm saying is that I never said, and I'm not going to say that cluster B is an addiction, but I really hope that we can take a lot of learning from the addiction recovery. Okay, that model, I think, along with CBT, could help us take the insights. Okay, but adapt them into a program that really helps us. Okay, so today I want to talk about one of those limbic level software routines. Okay, which is escapism. Okay, and I want to try to kind of sort of try to explore what makes the difference between escapism in non-pathological narcissism, just everyday narcissism in public, and the kind of narcissism that would warrant a diagnosis. Okay, so just kind of balancing those two things. So what do I mean by escapism? Okay, in my experience, okay, and I did not come from the worst family. Okay, I'm the first to admit my family had problems because my parents were cluster B, and there was a lot of emotional dysregulation and kind of disgusting emotion, I would say, in my family. There was a kind of hideous emotion, like emotional states that would almost be like demonic or just disgusting, kind of too much, like that would turn your stomach, And it was just because my parents, because they're cluster B, when they could get to certain levels of anger or certain levels of rage, there was almost like a volcanic, almost inhuman quality to the emotion that was just too disturbing to be healthy. Okay, and obviously, I think that's just you get to a point where you get so extreme in emotion and so disgusting that you almost get to a point where it's just kind of like it's just toxic, and it's sort of unmentionable, because in regular world, even though people go through their ups and downs, their good moods and bad moods, some people have in their own families sort of like a private, experience of things that in the regular world are sort of unspeakable. That there's no language because they're so disgusting, And so I experienced that, from a young age. It's not my parents' fault, but my parents have those issues, and so basically, I can say that I didn't come from the worst family, and my family was by no means like a terrible, terrible family. But there were enough things that I found so unspeakable that I didn't know how to relate them to ordinary people in the ordinary world. So I felt really set apart, and in my own way, I think my family experience was in some ways, kind of unspeakable, let's say. Now, it wasn't the same as going to World War I and having to live in the trenches, and watch people die, or let's say, I have to respect also what some people live today, like say in very bad neighborhoods where people get murdered all over the place, and there's drugs, and there's meth labs all over the place, and people just killing each other and getting into gangs, and so like I want to be very clear that there's a lot of things that I don't even understand, okay, that other people are experiencing every day. So there's all kinds of levels of let's say trauma, or let's say, sorry about those dogs, God. Anyway, I apologize. But anyway, there's lots of trauma out there that even I can't understand. And what I experienced, I don't call it trauma. I'm sorry. I just call it kind of unspeakable experience, and it's very formative experience. Okay. But I don't call it trauma, but I do think it was toxic. So let's just all agree that I had toxic experience. So with that background, how has escapism presented, and how do I see escapism as a fundamental, one of the constitutive, it's part of the constitution of narcissism, basically escapism. And it's kind of like this basic sense, it's like this weird sense that no matter how good or bad my life is, okay, it's this instinct, this deep instinct that there's a better place somewhere, okay? there's a better place somewhere, and that better place is easier. Okay, it's this weird, very visceral sense that there's a better place, and that place is sort of like unthinkably peaceful. It's like a better, peaceful, easier place. Okay, I think this motif, this theme of this better, easier place, it's kind of like, and it's always defined in contrast to where I am. Okay, so I could be wherever I am. I could be in a good place. I could be in a bad place. But there's this idea of like a better place that's easier and peaceful. Okay, and for whatever reason, our brain operates in the imagination to sort of idealize that escapist location. It's like we sort of idealize it as a perfectly wonderful, other place. Okay, and I think instinctively we just sort of know that there is that other place. Okay, sort of like a fantasy, but it's such a basic fantasy, and I think it's just produced by not wanting to be where we are. Okay, and maybe for good reason. Maybe some of us have been in unthinkable places. Okay, so it's only natural that we develop this sort of instinct of a better, easier place. Okay, so that's just kind of like just a basic element of this program, this software that sort of gets embedded in the deepest limbic level of our programming. Okay, it's so basic. And I think some of us learn more than others. Okay, and some of us are not even pathological. Okay, but we learn to sort of escape mentally, to sort of in a way believe that we're inhabiting the better place. Okay, that we're no longer where we are, but we're in like another place, and it's very deep in us. Okay, so okay, so in my experience, this escapism, and I want to try to really pin this down. This escapism, like I'm not aware of it, okay, but when I slip into the escapism, okay, and again, it happens so fast. It like I'm not even aware. It's just boom. It's like limbic. I just slip into the escape, mentally. I just get absorbed. Like say if I'm enjoying like a wonderful movie or a novel, I start to really unplug from all my present reality because I just love being in that place. It's just somewhere else, or just like good music or maybe some YouTube videos or just whatever, but I don't realize how much I'm unplugging from my present world, okay, with all my normal tedious irritations and all my normal tedious dissonances, okay. And then when I think about it, it's not just when I'm enjoying a book, it's not just when I'm enjoying cooking, chopping my vegetables or whatever, but also it's occurred to me that even just in normal life, unconsciously, I'm always unplugging from the clutter and the dissonances and the irritations around me. I'm always doing it. Okay, even when I'm not aware of it. Like I could just be driving my car and I think I'm dealing with things, but I'm really unplugging attention from all the clutter around me. Okay, so without realizing it sometimes, I'm sort of not thinking about what's important for my wife. I'm sort of not thinking about maybe her concerns, or I'm sort of not thinking about maybe just all kinds of things that are really present, but I don't realize how much I unplug because it's gotten into me, this deep escapist pattern that I sort of slip into a comfort zone, okay, even when I'm not aware of it. And when I say comfort zone, okay, but really isn't that the escapist pattern, okay? It's the idea that biologically, in our deepest limbic programming, we just kind of want to slip into an easier place and systematically unplug from all the clutter and irritations and dissonance of our present place, okay? And that's just a constant pattern, okay? And I think that might be sort of like the machine language, okay, that sort of ends up cashing out, okay, and sort of reduced empathic awareness, sort of reduced empathic attention, okay, and sort of an increase in self-absorption, okay. So deep in the machine language of this kind of like escapism, I think is also our intolerance of dissonance in the present environment. Okay, so basically, the escapism implies not just an intolerance of dissonance, okay, in the present environment, but also a disengaging, sort of an unplugging. I would call that dissociation, systematic sort of dissociation, piece by piece, you know. So basically, what is the machine language of escapism down at that limbic level? It's probably just a combination of irritability, not being comfortable with dissonances and clutter and just the frustration and tribulation of just present environment. And somehow an adapted, systematic, unconscious, automatic unplugging unplugging our attention from all the little mosquitoes of our life, basically, just all the dissonances, the issues, the having to deal with what other people think, just the friction, and just systematically dissociating, and then sort of slipping into a more comfortable place, okay? Sort of like the ideal world, sort of whatever. And we can do that with our identity. When I have a certain accent that I like to speak with, when I have a certain way of looking or a certain way of acting, I'm sort of inhabiting a better world where I get to be part of something that's not like this place, So it's sort of like this very persistent, very deep-seated pattern of just kind of unplugging and slipping into a better place, And so how then, since I think everybody does this, and I think even in the Bible, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, from ancient history, okay, civilized people have been sort of, how would you say, kind of escaping from our natural origins, The book of Genesis is very complicated because I don't really know if the garden is really the most natural place. I think the garden doesn't sound totally natural. It's not like wilderness, but at least there's the idea of coming from an original place and sort of escaping to another place. Although the Bible does it in reverse, so the Bible is so complicated. I sometimes wonder if the Garden of Eden isn't an escape from an earlier place that's not mentioned. Okay, that's my interpretation of Genesis. I think the Garden of Eden is a fantasy. Okay, it's a fantasy of a better place that we came to, like say, it's a fantasy of a better place in contrast to an original wilderness that is not mentioned. Okay, it's not mentioned. It's easier to say the world just began and we just got plopped into Eden, because that way we don't have to think about something horrible that we don't like about some wilderness that we just won't talk about. So we just start with a garden, you know what I mean? So almost like you start in escapism with Genesis, But if Genesis is analogous to other cultures, let's say, if let's say civilized cultures just kind of have this pattern, my assumption is that in the civilized world, we live in an escapism from something very uncomfortable about some unmentionable wilderness experience that we have just sort of dissociated from. So the escapism is kind of a persistent program that's ready to be coded into our limbic neurology, more or less. So what makes the difference between this escapism, let's say, in the pathological case, and the escapism, let's say, in just normal people? Because I say society, civilization is escapist, So what's the difference? I'm going to say that what makes the difference is not the escapism, okay? What it is, the difference will be the neurological processing of it. Okay, so I think what makes somebody more mentally ill would be, I would say, the noise signaling of the irritability and the intolerance of the environmental dissonances and all that. I assume that all people somewhat dissociate from the environmental mosquitoes, let's say, the environmental clutter and whatever. But I think that it's more pronounced as you get more towards the pathological, where the noise signaling, I say noise because I think the brain operates in noise signals, metaphorical noise. But I think the irritability is more noisy for those of us who are diagnosable. Okay, and I think the dissociation mechanisms are probably a little more like radical. You know what I mean? More radical. So it's more exaggerated. So basically, as far as I'm concerned, escapism is fairly universal. It is variable, but it is universal in civilized humanity. But I think, the pathological case, it's just there's something in the noise signaling that makes it more extreme and the more radical dissociation. So in the end, what makes us diagnosable is not that we are selfish people, whatever. It's just that we have more acute neurological pathological processing, more, more signal, noise signal exaggeration. So anyway, I really do think this issue of escapism is important, and I appreciate you guys watching this video. Thanks for watching.